Today at the National Press Club, Leader of the Nationals, Matt Canavan, the Queensland Senator, will discuss his push to improve Australians' living standards with what he calls a Patriots program for an Australian economic revival. Matt Canavan with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. I'm Andrew Probyn, National Affairs Editor for the Nine Network, and I'm also a Director here at the club. Our guest today is the Leader of the Nationals, Matt Canavan. He's also the Shadow Minister for Trade, Investment and Tourism. Now, Matt Canavan is not your typical Nationals leader. He's a senator for a start, not a member of the lower house. He's not a farmer, but an economist who worked with other pointy heads at the Productivity Commission. Before becoming a senator in 2014, he was Chief of Staff to his good mate, now political enemy, Barnaby Joyce, who has defected to One Nation. Matt Canavan's critics have called him a right-wing populist, but at university he was a self-described communist and a Marxist. And today he'll outline what he ominously calls an economic revolution. So hang on to your hats, folks. But before I throw to Matt Canavan, I should point out that he was only elected Nationals leader last month, has been very quick to join us at the National Press Club. The Prime Minister was here last Thursday, and we have open invitations for the leaders of the Liberals, the Greens and One Nation. Please join me in welcoming Matt Canavan.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you to the National Press Club for this generous invitation. I also want to thank a couple of my colleagues, Jamie and Susan, for being here today, along with a lot of hard-working staff. Thank you for the journalists for being here as well. I think Mark from the ACT Liberal Party is here, and Nicole Overall from the New South Wales Parliament. Thank you for being here today. As Andrew said, or earlier Morris said, it's my second appearance here at the Press Club, and in between that appearance and now, a few years ago, Anthony Albanese got asked about me on Gold Coast Radio. And I was a bit backbencher at the time, and I kind of triggered him. He went off on a rant about how I like to take photos in front of my tools in my shed. And I sort of gave him had a little bit of sympathy for him, because we had previously just won the 2019 election, and they'd gotten a bit of a towel up, and he was obviously still smarting about that. He said that all my tools were pristine. That's what did sort of cut a bit deep, because I do use the tools. I do sort of love my shed. It's one of the greatest things I was able to acquire. It was a home, and also a home with a shed in it where I could make my own furniture that we use. But I quickly learnt when I started making furniture that I could buy things a lot cheaper than I could make them. And there are a lot of tools behind me on my shadow board that I've only used once. I've spent way too much money at Bunnings, but I take a lot of pride in walking around my home and seeing things that I built, seeing beds. I used to have a Wiggles bed that my kids don't use anymore, they're too cool. They sleep in, benches we sit on, cabinets we use, a table that I wrote this speech on, things that I made. There's something important about real physical things that you take pride in. I even installed a Hills Hoist clothesline a few years ago that triggered other people. But just for the record, that was not a Mother's Day present. And my wife is right here. She can confirm that. She did want it, but it was not a Mother's Day present, despite the fake news saying such. But again, it was something that we made. Just a segue on that, Hills Hoist is not even made in Australia anymore. It's not made in Australia. So we did install a Hills Hoist. We installed a company called Austell. So I don't know if I'm allowed to promote companies here on this stage, but Austell is 100% Australian-made steel, and I'll come back to that issue. So it was a chance to, when Albo was triggered by that, it was a chance to reanimate myself with my shed and my tools, and I love them. I also love the shadow board I built, because it's something that if Australia didn't invent, it definitely popularised here. It's a bit unclear where it came from, the shadow board. But there's a guy called Essington Lewis, who's a great Australian hero. He was managing director of BHP, a great Australian company, and I recognise some of them here today. And he was a bit fastidious, Essington, and he insisted at the Newcastle Steelworks that everyone use a shadow board to cut down on the loss of tools. And one day he was walking around the shop floor and he noticed a magnifying glass on someone's shadow board, and he said to the worker, "Well, what's that for? Why have you got a magnifying glass?" And the worker shot back at him with a great Australian larrikin spirit. "Well, sir, that's so I can see me pay." And I love that story because it's a great Australian story, but it's also maybe a little bit relevant now because we probably need some magnifying glasses again to see our pay right now. Young Australians in particular have been smashed in the last few years. Living standards, real wages have gone back 15 years. And that's before you probably look at the real cost of land and housing. Adam Crichton did that in The Australian the other week, and on his numbers, you'd really go back to living standards in the 1990s for young Australians facing those costs. No wonder people are angry in this country. No wonder they are starting to say they'll vote for non-mainstream political parties. I've been angry the past few years at seeing our great country go down the toilet. I've been frustrated, I've been isolated. I've felt that maybe my career was over. But I think we're starting to get a wake-up call over the past year. And we are a country that I believe wants to rediscover our pioneering spirit, wants to start making things again. And I really do think we can recapture our Australian living standards if we focus on that once more. I think we need to do a few things that I'll outline today to do that. We need to scrap this crazy net zero madness. We need to protect our industries again so we can defend our nation, and we need to grow our country again, grow it in many different ways so there are more opportunities, and most of all, people can feel they can have a family, can have babies. It's the most important thing in life. A year ago, when I first ran for Nationals leader, the Australian Financial Review put a headline out saying that the Nats populism, the Nationals Party's populism, was a threat to the economic reset for the Liberal Party. And look, I'm not here to speak for the Liberal Party, but I'm also not interested in an economic reset. I think, given the state of our country, we need an economic revolution. We need major, major changes to get things back going again. And unfortunately, I think the comfortable and coddled and sometimes second-rate political class in this country, right here in this city, aren't thinking big enough. They're not thinking visionary enough about the changes we need. They remain trapped in the same old thinking of what we had before. It's as if just one more push on the energy transition, one more economic summit, one more go at sensible tax reform is going to fix things. I mean, can anyone explain to me how changes to the capital gains tax discount is going to move the needle in a way that will revert the 15 years loss of living standards we've gone through? Because we still remain trapped in, I think, the thinking of the last generation, the thinking of the Thatcher and Reagan era, but I don't think microwaved Milton Friedman is going to save the day. It's not going to cut it once more. And really, in this town, the chief cheerleader of this status quo, Captain Status Quo himself, is the Prime Minister. He is continuing to think in these ways. He was here at this stage last week, just saying more of the same, more of the same status quo that has delivered this economic disaster for the Australian people. Effectively now, Albo, who likes to present himself as a DJ, is now a cover band, just singing the greatest hits of decades ago. But they're not really as good as the original. And before I do seek to scrap a lot of what's gone before and start again, I do want to recognise why we did those things at the time. I think a lot of people have forgotten the reasons for some of those changes and why they were suitable then. I'll plagiarise Paul Kelly here and going back to what he described as the Australian settlement that existed, in his view, up to about the 1970s, where there was broad appreciation for government protection, wage arbitration, imperial benevolence from the British Empire that underpinned our economic growth as a country. But about 50 years ago, people started realising that that's not really working anymore, and there was a change. There was a changed view. UK joined the European community. We had stagflation with a couple of oil crises. We kind of might be there again. And there was a complete revolution in thinking. And what replaced the Australian settlement became kind of known as the Washington Consensus, a mix of trade liberalisation, privatisation, deregulation, which swept the world, swept the whole world, and it came here to this country too. For a long time that worked. It did. We benefited a lot by the globalisation of markets. Our productivity improved significantly in the 1980s and 90s, as did living standards of Australians. The world benefited from the end of the Cold War and the emergence of a whole massive new addition to the global consumption and workforce pool from Eastern Europe and communist China. That helped keep inflation low for a generation, and it's the world I grew up in, many of us here did, but that world has gone now. All of those trends are reversing. The population is ageing in most countries. We don't have those increases in workforce numbers. Spending and debt have gone through the roof. Businesses now are not running themselves to be profitable. They're following this thing called ESG, which if you don't know what it stands for, it's extreme shortages guaranteed. And you can see that at petrol stations today. China came into the WTO and it promised to get rid of its barriers, but it never did. And now we have a seemingly constant cycle of protection from different countries. All of these changes should make us reevaluate whether this former consensus is the right thing for our country. And we should be very clear about how we did deliver those benefits. It wasn't by mouthing slogans about the market or reform. It was because we took a concerted effort to, when we lowered trade barriers, we also lowered the costs of doing business. It was key. It was explicit. It was part of the strategy that if we were to expose our businesses to competition in other countries, then we would have to make sure that they were match fit and could compete with other countries. Now, of course, instead, we've just loaded them up with costs and we expect them to still survive when they're thrown to the wolves. We were in a world where trade barriers were coming down everywhere, and while we never quite got to free trade, especially in agricultural goods, there were lower trade barriers, whereas now, just in the last weekend, the US has whacked on 100% tariffs on our pharmaceuticals. China's just announced that they're not taking any more beef this year. The export quota has been reached. We're not in the same world we were. We also were able to achieve a lot of efficiency gains by just sucking more juice out of the lemon of the infrastructure that had been built in past generations. In the post-war period, we built the Snowy Hydro. We built lots of power stations. We built new centres like Cairns with an international airport and a tourist destination. We were able to make all of that work more efficiently, and that provided a gain. But the crucial thing is it was a one-off. Once you do that and make those things work better, that's it. You can't keep going back to that well. And finally, governments did reduce debt and did reduce deficits. I just can't believe this stat, but I checked it out. In the 18 years before the GFC, the federal government's budget deficit was just 0.2% of GDP. In the 18 years since, it's been 10 times that amount. It's been 2% of GDP on average, and clearly that's not slowing down under this government. So I think all of those conditions have changed, so therefore our policy settings have to change, and we have to listen to the Australian people and completely revolutionise how we do things. And I want to spend the rest of today outlining what I'm terming a patriot agenda for our national economic revival. A few things that will challenge some people, but I think are better suited to the times we live in. I think we need a manufacturing renaissance to protect key industries in this country, and we need to use all tools to do so, including the use of tariffs. We need to close our borders to mass migration. Our intake is far too high right now, and it's putting pressure on all types of services and infrastructure and housing. We need to deliver energy abundance. We have so much energy in this country, but we're not using it. We're locking most of it up through ridiculous bans, and that's holding our nation back. We should have a new 21st century national works program. We need to build new infrastructure, new dams, new power stations, and including new technologies like space as well. We need to build new cities. Why have we stopped at just a few? We've got a massive continent. That's one of the main reasons people can no longer have a house with a backyard. We need to do that. And if we do that, if we've got people with a home and a backyard, I think people will start having babies again, and we desperately need that given the shocking decline in our birth rate. So I'm not proposing a replay or reset. This, I believe, as I say, is something a little bit more significant. I am proposing a revolution. Some of it will need the slaying of long overdue sacred cows, including our naive belief that open trade and open borders and open flows of people are always and everywhere going to be the best thing for our country. They can be a good thing, they can be, and they have been in some times in the past, but they're clearly not the right approach now. 5 years ago, the Nationals Party released a paper on how to revitalise our manufacturing sector. In that paper, we did suggest that it was time again to protect some key industries. We did say that the anti-dumping regime needs to be totally overhauled and better suited to the situation we have today. And part of that involves the more judicious use of tariffs. Now, I don't agree with Donald Trump. I don't agree with Donald Trump on a few things lately, but I don't agree with Donald Trump that tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language. But I don't think it's a dirty word either. It's just a tool. It's a tool we already use through the anti-dumping regime, but we just do so in a pretty ad hoc, band-aid, knee-jerk fashion. We clearly are not facing an issue now of countries just every now and again dumping goods here. There is a more permanent strategy, explicit strategy, of many other countries, including the United States and China, to steal our industries, to take our jobs, and do so with a strategy that plays out over the long term. So to keep those industries here, we should respond in kind. We need a more permanent and coherent strategy to protect what's essential to our country. I've visited a lot of steel fabrication plants in the last few months, and many of them are on their knees. I visited a place called Genmar in Mackay just a couple of months ago. They make roof bolts to keep up the ceiling in an underground coal mine. Pretty important, very important to safety. They've always been Australian made from steel milled in Whyalla, sent to Mackay. They put a thread on it, put some plastic in it, and it goes into the coal mine industry. A great Australian supply chain, creates jobs right through the country. But in the past few months, they've started to see for the first time the importation of Chinese-made roof bolts that undercut them to a great degree. They currently, along with other steel plants, have an application in with the Anti-Dumping Commission right now. It possibly will take to the end of the year to resolve, and I don't know if that's enough time, and we've got to keep our steel industry. We are the biggest exporter of coking coal and iron ore in the world. It is the two things that make steel. Yet we are no longer self-sufficient in it, and we risk losing most of it. One of our steel mills is on taxpayer-funded support. We've got to keep this industry, and we've got to have a better plan to do so. I mean, the government's already put up the white flag in all of this. They've already admitted that things aren't working. In the past year alone, along with that Whyalla steel plant, they've also provided subsidies to aluminium, to zinc, to copper, more than $5 billion. And another $3 billion probably for the Tomago aluminium smelter in the weeks to come. This is protection. We're protecting industry. We're not doing free trade anymore, but we're just doing so in probably the worst way, where a few key businesses get government support and we ignore many of the other small businesses like Genmar, like these other steel fabrication plants who don't have the political capital. Now, those subsidies that the government is giving are much, much higher thanks to Labor's net zero agenda. Nobody can quite explain to me why that Rio Tinto could smelt aluminium in Newcastle and Gladstone for decades using coal-fired power and not need any subsidies. In fact, pay taxes, pay into the National Treasury. And then it's only been since they decided that they would turn their aluminium smelters to green energy, to follow renewable energy, that suddenly they've needed massive taxpayer support. Now, I thought the idea was green energy was cheaper. That was the idea. If it is cheaper, why do they need so much government funding? There are clearly extra costs from going to net zero, and the government's also admitted this through its carbon tariff approach. It's now proposing that we need carbon tariffs to save different industries. Again, if net zero was cheaper, why would we need a tariff on our own industry to protect ourselves from countries that are not pursuing net zero? That doesn't add up. And just on this, while I'm talking about net zero, bit of a segue. I hadn't watched the PM speech until last night on the way down the plane here, that was here last week. I did think after I listened to it all and I went and searched this, the Prime Minister did not mention net zero once. Not once. I mean, he'll say, to what I'm saying, he'll say, oh, he wants a future made in Australia. We want similar goals. I'd love to see that, that's great. But the whole centrepiece of the future made in Australia agenda, the whole point of Labor's manufacturing policy is to pursue net zero. That's what it all flows from. And yet the Prime Minister did not even mention that goal here on this stage last week. Has he dropped it? Not told us. They've just dropped the 82% renewable target, that's announced today. Have they dropped net zero too? Because if they don't believe in net zero anymore, their whole manufacturing agenda is bankrupt. And nothing shows that bankruptcy more than their response this last few weeks to the liquid fuel crisis we have. Just like steel, we're learning we need liquid fuels. And yet now the government is subsidising the foreign production of oil. We passed a bill last week in the Senate that would subsidise the production of oil in other countries to create jobs in those places. Yet we put a carbon tax on oil production in this country. So the Labor Party's got a tax on the last 2 refineries we've got here in Australia. So we're taxing our jobs here, refusing to develop our oil and gas here, but subsidising it in other countries. So to recapture our sovereign capability, we've got to end this net zero madness. We've got to invest again in all types of energy, including coal and oil and gas and nuclear. And yes, renewables too. They need to be part of the mix as well. But it just has to be a balance. Now, it's a great shame that we've had to go through a liquid fuel crisis for people to start to wake up to this, but I think they are. And while this is a tough time for many people, and I want to recognise the many businesses that are struggling right now with higher fuel costs, in some cases the unavailability of fuel, and in many cases the uncertainty of whether there will be fuel to finish planting regimes and the like around the country. I do want to give hope, though, that we can solve these challenges because we are in the lucky country, we are in the lucky situation that we are the only country in the world that has its own continent. We have our own continent. There's a lot of stuff on this continent, including a lot of oil and gas that's yet to be explored. All we have to do is unlock it. All we have to do is use our country again, and we will solve these problems. It'll only be through the use of our energy reserves, our energy resources, that we really have a Made in Australia agenda. It's the only way. If we do that, if we start using our country, we'll rediscover our pioneer spirit as a nation as well. We need to build things again. As I said earlier, we've relied too much on the infrastructure that was built by previous Australian generations, and we haven't built a major dam for a generation. When we were in last office, we did build the Rookwood Weir, which is a great water storage, and more than 500,000 macadamia trees are being grown west of Rockhampton now thanks to it. But we haven't built a major one for a while. We had funded the Hells Gate Dam when we left office, but the Labor Party has scrapped all that dam's funding, and we need to look again at expanding new farming districts. Last week, Angus Taylor and I announced that we want to see a proper inquiry, a commission of inquiry into the Murray-Darling. Part of that is to look at the water infrastructure that's there and making sure it can stay there. Because some of that, it's getting so old, we're living so much off the legacy of previous Australian generations, that some of that infrastructure is now getting to 100 years old without major investment. Things like the Burrinjuck Dam, just north of here in this town, it underpins so much farming production in the Murray-Darling. 40% of our food comes from there. But if we don't start reinvesting in those areas and looking at that now, we are risking not just having fuel security, but our food security in the future as well. We also need to look at new frontiers as well, investment in new things. I'm very proud of the work that Gilmore Space has done in North Queensland. They just launched our first attempt at an orbital space rocket a few months ago. It was our first, and that's great. Great to see Gilmore doing that. But a lot of people don't realise that New Zealand in the last few years have launched more than 50 orbital launches. On some measures in the last few years, New Zealand's only been behind America, Russia and China in terms of orbital launches. So they've done about 80 in total. We've done 1. And this government has deprioritised space, is not investing in it, and that is a massive mistake. Our first space port up there in Bowen, it's a great place. It's also where Adani exports its coal from. I think last time I was here I spoke more about that. It's a great place. If you know Bowen, it was meant to be the capital of North Queensland. It's got these huge wide streets, beautiful town. And it could be a lot bigger than it is. And so why aren't more of these places big cities? Why don't we grow more? We have a situation in Australia where basically we've got 2 big cities, Brisbane about half of those, and it's a very unique population distribution. We really don't have many cities at all, only a couple that are between 500,000 and 1 million people. And that really does limit options for Australian families, particularly for young Australians, to go to a place where they can afford a home, where they can have a future, they can have a backyard they can play cricket in, and they can possibly have a family if that's what they want. To deliver those cities, we need to invest in them. We need adequate services. I was deeply affected recently when I travelled to Albury and met with doctors and nurses and heard about the shocking state of their hospital. They've got doctors leaving, nurses leaving because it's just not fathomable, people leaving. It's terrible, and it shouldn't be happening in our 3rd biggest inland city. I'll be back there on Monday in Albury hosting a health forum with the Nationals candidate for Farrer, Brad Robertson. We need to invest in these places. We have an opportunity with work from home too, to build these new cities, to unleash those opportunities, because finally we have a situation where professional jobs can be done not just in our major cities but also in regional towns. And to get a family to move to a country area, you kind of do normally need 2 jobs, not 1. And if we have a greater variety of jobs in those country towns, there'll be more options for people to move. That'll be great for the people who do stay behind too. If people move to a new town, then there'll be more space in Sydney and Melbourne as well. And as I say, if we've got people with homes and backyards, they'll probably decide to have children. And I just want to firm up that how important this is. Our birth rate's below 1.5. If it stays at that level, it's a rough rule of thumb. The next generation will be our current population times by 1.5 divided by 2. You divide it by 2 because I think it's still the case that only women can have babies. The science is evolving fast, but I think that's still the case. So, on those numbers, our next generation, the people descended from the current Australians alive today, will be 21 million. Generation after that will be 16 million. The one after that will be just 11 million. So by the end of this century, just 11 million odd Australians will be descended from those alive today. That will completely change Australia, because we actually do need to have people that are born here, raised here, to hand down the flame of what is great about this country. Yes, we're welcoming, we take in migrants. I'm a product of that. But we also need to have children as well. Otherwise, we just won't have a country. And so I've supported a number of ways to do that. We'll have more to say about this, about giving parents more choice, but it has to be correcting the imbalance of the tax system, where parents who look after their own children are taxed to the hilt, sometimes paying $20,000 or more a year in tax, and that is just too big a cost to bear. If we do that, if we have more babies, we won't rely on migrants, have to rely on bringing in so many people as much, which is straining our country. Particularly in our universities, I hear from so many young people that they go to classes now and the vast majority of people are not Australian. And I think Australian universities should be there primarily to teach Australian students and to do Australian research. Sure, we can offer services, we can offer places to overseas students, but it's just gotten so far out of whack under this government, and that student visa scam has to end. And back in Essington Lewis's days, where I started, in the 1930s, we had a birth rate that was well above replacement level. We were a confident country. We did have a community that was wanting to defend this nation. Essington Lewis himself, he travelled to Japan in the 1930s, and he saw that war was almost certainly going to come. He came back to Australia and, with Holden and Orica, set up a company called the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation on his own bat, no government support, just did it because he wanted to defend our country. He was patriotic, as was Holden and Orica. And within a few years, they were making Wirraway aircraft that help us win the war. Within a few years. Great story. Are there Australian businesses that would do that today? It's taken me a while to get to them, but I'm not letting business off the hook on this stuff. A few years ago, someone approached me wanting to build a diesel refinery in Gladstone. I was Resources Minister, Northern Australian Minister. And I put him in touch with the Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility, who were helpful and tried. It was a good business case to supply diesel to particularly the mining industry. He came a cropper, though. He came a cropper when no Australian bank would give him a bank account. Couldn't get a bank account. He wasn't asking for a loan. He wasn't asking for some exotic financial derivative or project finance. He wanted to open a bank account to build a diesel refinery. And the Australian bank said no. This is not an isolated story. I've got plenty of people in the coal, oil and gas industries that can't get basic financial services from our Australian banking system. And I'm sorry, those banks that did that and made those decisions, they're not being patriotic. They're not patriotic Australians. And they have helped put us in this terrible situation where we have to beg for liquid fuels from other countries. We should never again as a country be in a position of begging for resources. We too have the resources here. We are in a situation, though, that if we don't use our country, we're going to lose it. We've got to use it. We've got to use Australia again. We've got to extract resources. We've got to develop our nation. We just need more of this country. There are a lot of problems, and I understand people are doing it very tough. There are a lot of problems. But everything that is wrong with this country can be fixed with what is right. Everything can be solved if we just do more and more Australia. I call it Hyper Australia. My son does, and I've stolen it from him. I call it Hyper Australia, but it's just Australia on steroids. We just need more of it. And if we do that, we will feel like we're lucky again as a country, and we will have a great future for our next Australian generation. Thank you very much to the Press Club. Thank you, Andrew. God bless, and happy to take your questions.
Matt Canavan, let me kick off. I too have a shed. I too like my woodworking. I've got this Stanley wood plane that was built in the 1960s in a factory in Glenorchy, Tasmania. Right. The fact is you don't build Stanley wood planes anymore in Australia or make them because it's much more expensive and you can do it cheaper. You couldn't buy anything that's made in Australia in Bunnings that would be 3 times the price. So who pays for your economic revolution, given that it has to be the consumer in the end who cops it?
Well, 2 points I want to make. First of all, I can do you one better. I actually have a knockoff Stanley wood plane that has, I think it has, from memory, CCP stamped on the front. It's either that or USSR or some such.
Russia is not our future.
Well, maybe knocking off stuff is, I don't know. But it's exactly like a Stanley wood plane. I bought it off eBay. It's a great little tool that can fit the Stanley, the blades. Look, I would suggest to you, Andrew, that the cost of not supporting Australian industry and key Australian products is much, much greater. Okay, look, yep, one proposal you put on the table is that we continue to buy cheap stuff, primarily from China. We flood Bunnings with it and, yep, can fill up your tool shed more by doing that. And then at some point we'll find ourselves in a situation where we don't have basic things.
So where's the money come from?
It needs to, if we're going to do this in a more sensible fashion, we need to take the pressure off our Australian Treasury. As I said in my speech, Andrew, we are already doing this. I mean, the government has recognised that we need to do something, but in what they're doing right now is making all of us pay by handing out to the current numbers, $5 billion in the last year, probably another $3 billion in the next few weeks. They've got $8 billion in hydrogen subsidies they still have in the books. Millions of that has already been lost to Twiggy Forest. And so this is costing us an arm and a leg now. Wouldn't it be a lot smarter to spread the cost of that, not just to Australian taxpayers, but also in response to those countries that are taking these protective actions? I mean, what I'm proposing is all within our rights and responsibilities as members of the World Trade Organisation. If another country is going to protect its industry, and keep in mind, China subsidises its industry to an extent or to an amount of money larger than it spends on its defence forces. It is a massive, massive program that's very explicit. It's not secretive. We have every right to respond and say, look, if they are going to act in that way that's not consistent with the subsidies and countervailing agreements under the WTO, we have a right to respond and protect our industry, protect our jobs. And that, in my view, will be a lot cheaper than relying on the taxpayers just continuing to bail out selected firms and or putting ourselves in the kind of crisis we're in now where we don't have the availability of basic essentials.
All right, the first question from Jacob Stayman.
G'day, Senator. Thanks for your address. In it, you talk about how Australia's leaders have driven us down this cul-de-sac with their insistence on economic rationalism, free trade, the free market. It reminded me of an interview that Andrew Hastie gave a couple of weeks ago, which he said, "No one's going to reward us for a final last stand for neoliberal politics." He also, as you did, urged for a rewrite of the traditional liberal economic orthodoxy. Is open-minded to cutting property investor tax concessions, taxing gas multinationals more. Meanwhile, you've got Angus Taylor, who is, has maintained his belief in the Thatcher, Reagan, Friedman, model of economic rationalism. I just want to ask, other than disavowal of net zero, what do you have ideologically in common with the leader of the Liberal Party, and would you not be more aligned with the Liberal Party helmed by Andrew Hastie?
Well, look, thank you very much, Jacob. Look, it's always hard. I always find it hard, and a lot of journalists always want me to put myself in the minds of other people and say, what do they think, and compare that to what you think. I don't know exactly. A couple of things I'll say to your question. One, I welcomed Andrew's contributions to the debate. I think, as I've outlined today, there's a need for out-of-box thinking right now, unconventional ideas to save this country. Two, I've got a great friendship with Angus Taylor, go back a long way, and I think we've shown in the first few weeks how united we are on pushing this government to do a better job, proposing to cut the fuel excise, focusing on water issues last week, stopping the increase in the size of Parliament. That would have been a disaster. So I'm working very strongly there. But I'm also proudly, of course, as leader of the Nationals Party, which I can better speak to, the Nationals Party agenda to revive manufacturing. What I've said today builds almost exclusively on what we released 5 years ago. And I would argue that looking back, that seems a pretty prescient piece of work that the Nationals Party did, and recognise the work that Bridget McKenzie did and many others did in the party room at that time to deliver this. Back then, we were trying to respond to the COVID supply chain crisis. Now we've got another supply chain crisis. The question is whether we'll take action now. So that's what I'm focused on. As I said earlier, I'm focused on presenting the Nationals Party plan to deliver this economic revolution for people. I'm focused on the Australian people. I don't know what other people will think of my ideas. All I know is that a year ago, you guys wouldn't have given me a chance in hell to convince the Liberal Party or anyone else that they should drop net zero.
But to Jacob's question...
Well, hang on, let me finish this point, Andrew, because you just wanted to interject because I was criticising you guys. But you wouldn't have given me a chance in hell to convince people on net zero. You're all dismissing me. I was a crank and out there. And now, not only is the Liberal Party supporting net zero, the Prime Minister won't even mention the words.
But back to Jacob's question, you're in a coalition. Is Angus Taylor up for your revolution?
Well, as I say, I'm not here to speak for other people.
You're in a coalition.
I know that Angus and the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party, have always been supportive of developing our manufacturing industries. Going back to this issue around the Anti-Dumping Commission, right now we've got 28 different commodities that are subject to different anti-dumping duties or tariffs. It's a complete dog's breakfast, but most of those were put in place when we were engaged. We were trying, but the question now is it fit for purpose? And I think that's an agenda that all coalition members will get behind because, as I say, we are very passionate about rebuilding our manufacturing industries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Next question, Tom McElroy.
Thanks, Probe. Senator, thank you for taking our questions. Could you explain more how your tariff regime would work? Would tariffs be permanent? How long would they have to be in place to create the manufacturing renaissance that you seek? And isn't it true that domestic consumers pay tariffs, not the countries importing into Australia?
Well, thank you, Tom. In terms of the details of this, there is a lot of detail in our manufacturing paper that I'll refer you to. What we propose is that the Anti-Dumping Commission investigates these key industries. We thought metals manufacturing, food, clean energy, space, defence to start with. And across those industries, it looks at, well, what are other countries doing? What are our options legally to respond? And how can we put in a more coherent and permanent situation to protect industries over the long term? As I said, if you go to the current Anti-Dumping Commission website and you look at, well, how do we protect structural steel, right? So stuff like C channels, H channels, stuff like that. That's just basic building blocks of construction. You go to their ruling at the moment. You've got to work out what the length is, what type of channel it is. You've got to assess something called the ascertained export price. That's got to be looked at against the export dumping price, which is just the price that's paid. Then you've got to work out whether an ad valorem tariff is applied and also a floor price. You know, look, I would imagine even a lot of the business in the sector have no idea what this is. So what I'm saying is we could be much more coherent with this. We could provide much more certainty, and that would have not only better productive gains for our country, it would also be cheaper over long term for consumers. To your second point, you did say, oh, well, won't tariffs be passed on to consumers? I mean, I did sort of deal with that in terms of Andrew's question. As I say, we already are doing this. We already are doing this. Some of these tariffs in equivalent terms go over 100% on these goods. But I would argue they're doing it in a way which does make things more costly long term, which eventually will still see our industries go out the back door and be much, much costly for our country, both to save what we have left in that situation, which we're trying to desperately do now, and or deal with the response of not having basic essentials available in times of crisis.
Thanks. Next question is from Isabella Tolhurst.
Isabella Tolhurst, ABC. You've described the era of free trade and liberalisation as over. What sort of message would you give to some of your colleagues who are big proponents of free trade? Are you trying to bring them on board with your perspective on things?
Well, Isabella, thanks. I mean, I support free trade too. I'm sad that this era is over, but I live on this planet and have to deal with the reality in front of me. As I said earlier, this era of globalisation and free trade did deliver great benefits for our country, and it would be better if we could return to such a world. But at some point, we do have to face the fact that things have changed, and it doesn't just seem to be a one-off. Whatever you think of what the Trump administration has done on this front, they were things that were all kept by the Biden administration. As I mentioned in my speech, China's been doing this for a long time. The EU, which we signed a free trade deal with only a couple of weeks ago, just a few weeks before that, they announced that their steel tariffs are going up to 50%. Right? So we've got this, as I say, you go this convoluted scheme for H channel and C channel. Europe hasn't done that. They've just gone whack. You know, we need to protect our steel industry. Tariffs are 50%, like it or lump it. And so at what point do we recognise that the board game we're playing is totally different? And while it might be second best, it might not be our first best option, we still need to make choices for our country and our nation that provide the best benefits in that world as we have it. Because I can't wave a magic wand and make free trade come back.
Thank you.
Next question, Ellen Ransley.
Senator Ellen Ransley from the Courier Mail. Thanks for taking our questions. Just on the baby boom, you've laid out a couple of ways you might encourage people to have more babies, but would a Costello-era baby bonus be on the cards, do you think? And would you support further expansion to childcare subsidies or the private sector adopting superannuation on paid parental leave, for example, to really encourage more people to have babies?
What was the last bit? Superannuation?
Super on PPL.
Oh, right. I gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ellen. Okay, I'll step through all of those things. Look, I haven't been a proponent of a one-off cash handout to families like a baby bonus. I think the basic principle here is better if we help people who help themselves. So if people are working and earning tax or paying tax, and trying their best, then we can provide some support on top of that. Obviously, we do have schemes in place to help people that are very poor and can't otherwise help themselves, support those. But just broad-based cash handouts for everybody, I don't think is the best response for people in those circumstances. And to get to the goal of what I'm trying to achieve and what I've pushed for my whole political career, I think it's much better to use the tax system as much as possible to do that, because if you're let's take a real-world example. If you're a double-income family with 2 kids and you're earning $150,000 a year, if you make a decision as a family unit to have one spouse stay home and earn that $150,000, you'll end up paying about $17,000 more tax than a same family who splits the $150,000 across 2 incomes. $17,000 a year. like that makes the decision to stay home and look after a child very, very expensive. It's, at least in my experience, it's a decision that a lot of parents want to make, in that first year or two of life. It's I mean, nothing's more important. Like, it's just, who cares about your work? Even, like, I've got a great job. I really enjoy it, but, my job as a dad and a husband's way, way more important, and I wish I could spend more time with them. So if we can encourage people to do that, that's a great thing. That's what I'd like to see. In terms of the childcare system, we obviously need a well-funded and productive childcare system, because some people have no other choice, and eventually kids do grow up out of that newborn phase, and a lot of people need to use childcare as well. That's fine. Look, I'd put to you that we have massively expanded childcare subsidies. They're sitting at around, last time I checked, $15 billion a year now, massively up over the last decade. I think we're starting to see the limits of that pressure we're placing on the system. There's been some shocking examples, obviously, recently of a lack of standards in the sector, and I know that's not all providers, but it perhaps is a early warning of the stress and strain we're putting on a system where we're kind of making every parent do that to afford a mortgage and still pay their taxes and the like. So I think we should take pressure off that system as much as possible. As I say, I think a lot of parents would like to spend time with their children, especially with their newborns. If we can help them and encourage them to do that, then that frees up opportunities for places for people to use the childcare system. That's what I'm an advocate for. And then in terms of super on paid parental leave, look, I think there are a lot of options for the superannuation system that could help. I mean, this will all be about providing more choice to Australian families. There's a lot of my coalition colleagues working on this, a lot are very passionate about it, and it's another area where there needs to be major revolution in how we do things. I particularly would highlight the innovative idea that Jane Hume has put out there. I think that's got a lot of merit. She's actually got a bill. I presume she's like me now, she's a leader, so she can't move private senator's bill. But before she was leader, she moved a private senator's bill, which is a great bill, to transfer superannuation between spouses more easily. So, my wife's here and I embarrass her. I said at the time, if that bill goes through, half my super goes to her, totally. In our lives, I've worked more, I've got more super, but it's not my money. We work as a team. So if I could do it, I'd transfer it straight to her. And as I say, we try and work as a team. Still not sure if my kids are on the same team, working on that, but anyway.
Just on the first half of your answer there, are you saying that you support the splitting of that 150 between two parents as an alternative to increasing the childcare subsidy?
I do support that being looked at, Andrew. Most other developed countries have some form of income sharing or splitting between couples for the tax system. It does surprise me. The tax system is about the only place where we're not treated as a team. You go to family benefits, you get treated as one household. Your Medicare levy, treated as one household. Pay tax, bang, you're treated separately. So some degree of sharing would be beneficial. I think you've asked, would they be able to split their whole income? That's got to be costed, and it comes at a cost. When I first came to the Senate...
it's not holding you back at the moment.
Everything will be costed, Andrew, as it always is. When I first came to the Senate, I wrote a detailed paper on this where perhaps a better option to start with is give everybody 2 tax-free thresholds. We could means test that. We could restrict it to people with young children in these circumstances I described. And that would be at a reasonable cost.
All right.
So
Matt
look,
Franklin.
that's all work that's got to be done, but there's lots of different models here.
Matthew Franklin.
Hi, Senator. Matthew Franklin from Capital Brief. I understand, as I think I've heard you say, there is a lot of concern in the community about levels of migration, but I also understand that the figures tell us that there is some pretty severe labour shortages in this country: mining, agriculture, construction, health. In those circumstances, doesn't the Australian community deserve something a bit more nuanced from you than close the borders? And what is the risk that not just your party but all parties in the current attempt to respond to the public concern, that we end up with some pretty dud policies that actually leave employers without the ability to get workers?
Well, Matt, I don't think I said it would close the borders to all migrants. I said we should end the student visa scam. And I don't see how those student visas are helping those workforce shortages in mining and construction and agriculture. Don't think that's happening. Might be wrong, but I think what's happening is migration agents are marketing Australian universities as a pathway to Australian citizenship or permanent residency. That's what's happening. Why don't we just call a spade a spade? Like, it's clear as day. Everyone can see that. And yes, Australian universities are making a lot of money off that, but I don't think that should be their principal purpose. So, look, that should be the start of any change. We did run a skilled migration program for many years without a lot of controversy, and we should still do that and get back to that. But we do just need to do so in a way that's calibrated to the needs of the Australian people. And despite the Prime Minister promising that he would halve migration before the last election, he's gone nowhere near that figure. It's still sitting at over 300,000 people a year. It's taken on 1.3 million in 3 years, the fastest migration rate in Australian history by far. The previous record was just over 800,000 under the Rudd government. He's 500,000 over that in 3 years. Now, we did need to open our borders after COVID, but that opening's been completely botched. It's now tearing at the social cohesion of this country, and I just don't think this government's taking it seriously enough.
Next question, Rosie Lewis.
Rosie Lewis from The Australian. Senator Canavan, you may be the right Nationals leader to fend off One Nation. We'll find out shortly in the Farrer by-election. Given you're the Parliament's #1 critic on net zero, are you the wrong Nationals leader for the coalition to win back Teal seats? And before you dismiss that, without those seats, aren't you condemning the coalition to a lifetime in opposition? Or do you see another path, a different formula to winning back government?
Well, Rosie, the formula is to focus on the Australian people. Primarily, we've got to deliver results for them, not focus on winning seats. We obviously need to win seats to be in government, but if that remains the focus of what we're doing, we'll miss the mark, and people will switch off and we won't win anywhere, most likely. So we've got to stay focused on what we think is best for the Australian people and argue for that, fight for that as hard as we can. In terms of your question about Teal and climate seats, these concerns, look, we're winning the net zero debate. We're clearly winning it. As I said before, why didn't the Prime Minister mention net zero last week? I mean, if it was such a winner for them, and I'm such a liability for my team that you suggest in these areas, why didn't the Prime Minister call me out and say, oh, Matt Canavan doesn't support net zero? All these people are concerned about it. Why? Why? I mean, the Labor Party are very ruthless. I mean, I say I'm not focused on seats, I'm focused on winning. They're focused on winning for the Australian people. They're focused on winning seats. Clearly, they've done the sums and realised that this is not an issue, this is not a winner for them anymore, and we're winning that debate. We're winning it because we've put pressure on them about it. We're winning it because we've called out the absolute absurdity of this situation, that we would tax our own country, our own industries, and let other countries off scot-free. One thing I didn't mention in the speech that definitely cuts through in my communities and deserves greater recognition is we have not really reduced our emissions across the board. More than 90% of our emissions cuts have come from locking up farmland and creating these magical things called carbon credits. More than 90%. You can look at the stats. And we have lost 7 million hectares of land to that process. If you tick the box, if you're a good person and tick the box on the Qantas ticket and say you want to be green, I've never done that because I'm not a good person on these things, but anyway, other people are. So you tick the box and do that. Let's say you're flying business class from Brisbane to London with you and your spouse. I worked that out the other day. That's 16 tonnes of carbon you've just admitted. So if you tick the box, guess how much land you have to lock up? Well, ABARES says something between 10 and 25 tonnes of carbon are abated for every hectare of land. So you have to lock up a hectare of land for a year to be a good person. Is that really being a good person? Well, how does that benefit the environment? Just shut down farm. That's what happens. You shut down farm production. There's no cattle growing, no crops growing, no jobs being created. It's worse for the environment. It goes back to scrub, we know, in the bush. It doesn't get managed. Pests and weeds come in. It's terrible. So that's 7 million hectares. The government finally released all ABARES. We snuck it out before Christmas, the Agricultural Advisory Body. Before Christmas, they put out a report showing that to get to net zero, we need to lock up another 18 million hectares. So 18 plus 7, 25, that is 4 times the size of Tasmania of farmland. guys, is this really a good plan? Now, that's why they're not talking about net zero, because we point out those absurdities. We point out the emperor has no clothes, and we're going to win. We'll win on that basis.
By the time of the next election, then, do you deem more than half of the Australian population will be against net zero, and that is what will get you in?
Well, I saw a poll the other day Rosie, that 40% of Greens voters now support drilling for oil and gas. It's changed pretty quick. So I made the comment the other day that, well, on that note, if those averages apply, if 40% of Greens voters support oil and gas drilling, that means 4 Green senators support it too. If we can just find them and convert them, we can take control of the Senate. So I think things have already shifted.
Next question, Brittany Bush.
Thanks, Probes, and thanks, Senator. Britt Bush from The Age and The Herald. Just on that Farrer by-election, your predecessor predicted that the Nationals could come last. Do you agree with David Littleproud on that front, and how much weight are you putting on the outcome of that race and what it says about the future of the Nationals and the coalition more broadly?
Yeah, look, thanks, Britt. I always approach these sort of races like a racehorse. Racehorses don't know their odds, and I don't want to know them either. I just got to race and run as fast as I can, particularly for the people of Farrer. Yes, I want to win this by-election, but even more important, it's times like these that I can take up the ball for those people. Because you just asked a question about the people of Albury, of Griffith and other things. If there hadn't been a by-election, you wouldn't have asked about the people in those areas. No riff off you, but that's the hardcore reality, right? So I have an opportunity in the next few weeks to get solutions for the Albury Hospital, to stop these ridiculous water buybacks the government is continuing, and instead give back to the farmers of this country that grow our food. I have an opportunity to make sure that I get across all the infrastructure needs of that area and take us to its great potential, because this part of the country, I've spent a lot of time there and across my political career, mainly with my great mate Barnaby Joyce, but in between the Murray and the Murrumbidgee there, it's just a beautiful part of our country. And as I say, it is our nation's food bowl, so much opportunity. And yes, I want to win the election, but it's even more exciting to be able to bring focus to that area and provide some solutions for the people in Farrer.
Rhiann Tamer.
Thanks, Senator. Rhiann Tamer, SBS. You've been vocal about the US president criticising his rhetoric around the war in Iran. In this, as you say, uncertain world and with an already suffering global economy, can we afford for leaders here and around the world to take such a public stance against who is arguably one of the most powerful people on the planet, lest we be punished further for it?
Look, I thank you for the question, but I think we've got to call a spade at times like these. That's a great Australian trait. And yes, we are great friends with America, but good friends should be able to tell truths to each other. And the post from the President overnight went way too far and beyond the realms of acceptability. I haven't caught up with the news in the last hour or so, but it has at least been positive to see that it looks like there is now an off-ramp, and I don't know if the widespread condemnation of the President's post played a role in that. Maybe did, certainly not mine, but there were plenty of other world leaders that did that, and perhaps common sense is prevailing. Let's hope so. I hate these sort of conflicts. They're terrible in the loss of human life. They normally lead to worse outcomes, as we've seen in our lifetimes. So the quicker we can end this conflict, the better. And hopefully now we do have some slimmer of hope that will happen.
Do you believe the alliance with the US has been damaged by Donald Trump?
Look, no, I think it's stronger than any particular posts or particular criticism that we may have about individual actions. In saying that, Andrew, it's absolutely clear that this is a different world, and we can't simply rely on the comfortable truths of the past. It does have that additional consequence that we need to reinvest in our own self-sufficiency. We need to look after ourselves. I do grate sometimes at a little bit of small-minded thinking that somehow we can't defend ourselves. I mean, as I said, we've got the whole continent, we've got massive resources, we've got the benefit of distance from other countries. We could do a much better job of this, and clearly we need to, given the uncertainty in the world of today.
Lucinda Garbutt-Young.
Thank you, Senator, for your address. Lucinda Garbutt-Young from the Canberra Times. You've spoken previously, or you've spoken today rather, about a need as part of your economic revolution to really build out regional hubs and bolster the economy there. You've previously said that you want federal government to make it easier for work from home to happen in places further from Canberra to drive regional employment. The latest APS data shows that in December, just 35% of federal public servants, that's about 70,000 people, are based in the ACT. Nationally, about 13.5% of APS employees are based outside capital cities. So my question is, what percentage would you like to see that increase to, and how do you think that you can achieve that aside from flexibility that's already in place? Would it look like targets or having certain positions earmarked for regional hubs?
Look, very good question, Lucy. I believe those statistics about the proportion of public servants outside of Canberra are fairly long-standing, because obviously a lot of frontline roles are away from this town. But still, 30% of the total numbers of public servants is a big, big number, and there's a potential and opportunity to help support regional development if we make it easier to live and work away from just one place. Look, I don't have a target in mind. What I would like to see is more encouragement of it, more integration of allowing this to happen in a way which continues to grow teams. I mean, I'm very mindful of the fact that while I think work from home is this wonderful opportunity, we still need human-to-human interaction between people, particularly young people that are up and coming in their careers. So it just has to be a much more concerted effort to still achieve that while someone living in a Mildura or an Albury or a Rockhampton, where I'm from. I think we can do that. But at least to date, it seems to me that work from home for the public service has largely been about working from home here in this town, in Canberra, not looking further afield and helping our national interest.
Are there particular departments that you think would be best placed to be bolstered regionally with professional skill sets?
Look, I think, my understanding, Lucy, is any department that allows work from home in Canberra should be able to do this as well. And I think pretty much all of them do. I mean, there will be some, obviously, in high-level security, policing, these things, where you just need to be physically on the ground. But I think it's pretty widespread. So anyone that does that should be able to do it for the nation.
Next question, Corey McLeod.
Thank you for your address, Senator. Corey McLeod from InnovationAus.com. You've been talking today about building capability, building resilience, sovereignty. You mentioned space and defence. Looking at Australia's ability to build complex things, government as an exemplar is a huge lever in terms of building that capability, but it seems to be a nut we can't crack. And if you look at government as an exemplar and procurement as a lever to build contracts and not grants, it seems to be a cultural cringe that we cannot fix. And at a time like this, do you have thoughts on how we might address that?
That's a great question. It's something I didn't get time to cover, but in that Nationals paper I mentioned on manufacturing, we have a whole bit about the need to lever government procurement to support manufacturing initiatives and, of course, also innovation. I use a couple of examples here. When we were in government, we sought to establish a domestic manufacturing industry of 150mm shells. Now, admittedly, this is not the most innovative military hardware, but it is still, as you can see in Ukraine, the workhorse of any defence force. Through some government support, that factory got established in Maryborough in Queensland, and this new government's come in, and I think because they felt we did it and it wasn't them, they've gone to a French company, TELUS, to supply that material. And that's pretty sad to me. So I'm just not, they'll have to answer for that and ask why are they using federal government contracts to support French industrial military capabilities, not Australian. And then the other example is Gilmore Space, as I mentioned in my speech there. Look, the government eventually helped them get through the red tape hurdles. It was pretty hard though, could be a lot easier. It took a long time to get approval for their orbital space launch. I think there could be a much greater effort to focus on some key industries and roll out the red carpet for them, not the red tape.
Thank you.
And our final question is from Julie Howe.
Thank you for your speech. At the beginning of your speech, you set the scene of a country that is in declining wealth and prosperity, and you said this is why we need an economic revolution, not just an economic reset. I just note that last year the Swiss bank UBS, in its global wealth report, found that Australia was the second wealthiest country in the world after Luxembourg. Australia median wealth stands at $413,000. That means that half the population has more than this amount and half the population has less. I'm just wondering where your statistics and modelling came from to substantiate your claims about declining prosperity.
Well, I outlined them, but I suppose if I'm going to criticise your statistics like this, the same rule applies to me. There are obviously three types of lies: damn lies and statistics. But I think if without seeing your stats in detail, I think the problem is a whole amount of that wealth is locked up in Australia's property holdings. And there's two issues with that. One is the obvious one, that there's a lot of young people that don't have that level of wealth now in Australia, and that's probably why you're seeing so much anger out there, is because they don't think they can in the future reach those heights without a lifetime of slavery and paying mortgage interest to the bank. So that's number one on that. Number two is, look, with it all being locked up in property, it's, to my mind, always been a little bit of a false, gives you false hope that you're wealthier than you think, because you always need a home to live in. So if you only own one property, and some of us own more, I used to, but I've sold that one, but if you only own one property, it's great, my property value's gone up, fantastic, and I can borrow a bit more and do other things, a bit more flexibility. But I still need to live in a home. And so if I sell my home, I need to buy another one that, guess what, that value's gone up as well. So that real wealth has not gone up in that situation. And that's why those statistics that Adam Crichton mentioned are so important, that a lot of the stats you see aren't actually factoring in that extra cost of land, which is a massive handbrake on, I would say, on innovation in this country. I mean, how can anyone young now think, look, I'll take a risk in my life and start up a business? The costs of you failing are huge, because you get behind, you can't get back into the housing market if you go bankrupt. Well, where does it end? So we can't just rely on those wealth statistics. We've got to make housing more available. It's about the things people can live in and do, not a number on a spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm sure we all understand your thinking a lot more. Join me in thanking Matt Canavan.